About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
Hello there. This is Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller, a long-time student of consciousness studies, cybernetics, and anthropology, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore relevant news items or answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Or you can go on the www.noeticmoments.org website and fill in the form. In the world of medicine and psychology, consciousness is defined as being awake and aware, knowing what's going on around us. In the field of noetics, though, consciousness is much more. It's the processes and products of mind, both in our awareness and outside of it. It's profound human experiences that shape our lives. And ultimately, consciousness is what connects us all. So far in this series, we've looked at a number of models of what consciousness is. And you can track all of these on our website, noeticmoments.org, or on the KXCR.net website in the archives. That's the little cloud up in the banner. We started at the beginning, with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung's ideas from the early 20th century. Then we went into the mid-century with Charles Tart's 1960s descriptions of various states of consciousness, and Julian Jaynes, who related consciousness to the separation of right and left hemispheres in our brain. We looked at some of the field models of mind that have been developed by Kurt Levine, Rupert Sheldrake, who we'll hear a lot more from today, and others, trying to explain how it is that mind affects and is affected by the body and other things outside of the body faster than nerve signals can travel. Then we began to consider how quantum mechanics might explain some of these things with the work of David Bohm, Dana Zohar, and Amit Goswami. We also looked at the global brain, or noosphere, as described by Peter Russell, Teilhard de Chardin, and Ervin Laszlo. And we explored the field of transpersonal psychology, which was founded in the 1970s to apply some of these newer understandings in therapy and in research. We then looked at the work of Bruce Lipton and Candace Pert, who described how hormones act as molecules of emotion and lead to biology based on our beliefs. We've explored some of the experimental results supporting these new ideas about consciousness, looking at the Global Consciousness Project and its ongoing tracking of humanity's emotional responses to major events, presentiment and the sense of being stared at, which we're going to explore a little more fully today, demonstrating that the body responds and the mind seems to be aware several seconds before the eyes and ears actually perceive, and sometimes when they don't perceive. Then we focused on what is increasingly called coherence, that state of consciousness in which the heart, the mind, and the emotions are in alignment, which gives us a sense of well-being and increases our capacity to function in the world. And last week we looked at the experimental evidence for what might be called telepathic communication between two people. As I said, you can always catch up on those past shows on the KXCR.net archives. Remember to click on that little cloud up on the banner at the top of the screen. And on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention. This week, we're continuing to look at the experiments that support the models we've been reviewing these last weeks, specifically the evidence for what is known as clairvoyance, the ability to sense something happening somewhere else in space and time. Now, there have been many cases where a person, or a dog, has been given something that belonged to someone and could help the police find that person, or what had happened to that person. The TV shows Psychic Investigators has documented dozens of such cases, as has the series Psychic Detectives, and periodically such stories occur on local news shows. I'm going to give you an example of one now, but warning, the following descriptions describe cases that may be difficult to hear about, so you might need to turn down the radio for about 2 minutes, maybe 3.
One of the most prominent cases involving police and psychic work came back in 2001, the murder of Amy St. Laurent. She was a 25-year-old woman who was beaten and shot to death by a man she had a chance encounter with one night here in the Old Port.
In that case, former detective Joe Laughlin called Vicki Monroe, a psychic messenger, for help.
I immediately, there she was, standing in front of me, Amy. Full, looking just like I'm looking at you.
At that time, only police knew that Jeffrey Russ Gorman and 2 of his friends had been interviewed by authorities.
The first thing she said that was very pronounced was she mentioned the suspect's name.
And I said, oh, she just said Jeff. And I said, the other name I get, Gorman.
And I went, whoa, okay. Now, there was no information in the paper. There's no way that you can put 2 and 2 together at that point in time.
Police zeroed in on Gorman.
There was a trauma, a blow to the head. And then she's suddenly standing in front of this large farm, which I then find out is, a very popular farm, that Smiling Hill Farm.
It turns out Jeff Gorman's mother lives along Route 22 in Scarborough, not far from the Smiling Hill Farm.
I said, I see a yellow house. She's telling me he lived in 2 states. He lived down south, and now he's living with his mother. Look for the house. Look for her. They're close.
On an afternoon in early December, 6 weeks after she had disappeared, the body of Amy St. Laurent was found in a shallow grave with a large board covering her body, just as the psychic had said.
Unfortunately, those kinds of cases happen far too often. And fortunately, there are people who are willing to go into that state of being and get that information. And then there's remote viewing, which we touched on a few weeks back in this show, and which has also been talked about on TV. I thought I'd share this one with you as well.
Angela Ford was with Project Stargate for 9 years. She calls herself a medium. The Defense Department preferred remote viewer.
In a sense, were you hired as a psychic spy?
I guess, yes.
Her assignment? To look for missing hostages and fugitives without ever leaving this building at Fort Meade in Maryland.
I was called into session, and my boss asked me, where is Charles Jordan?
In 1989, Ford says she was able to psychically track down a former customs agent who had allegedly gone rogue.
I said, the man is in Lowell, Wyoming, and I spelled it Lowell.
Ford was off by a letter. It was Lovell, Wyoming.
Well, when my boss went to Customs and said, we're still getting the Wyoming feeling, Customs said, as we are speaking, we are apprehending Charles Jordan 100 miles west of Lovell, Wyoming.
So you were right.
We were right.
So we have numerous documented cases of people sitting in one room, one place somewhere, and then seeing with their mind's eye or hearing with their mental hearing information that then is about someplace, somewhere, sometime in the past or somewhere else on the planet. Remote viewing, clairvoyance, clear seeing, is now becoming an almost regular part of some activities, even though materialist scientists who are convinced that all activities of the mind are located in the brain and a function of electrochemical reactions in the brain would deny the possibility that anyone could perceive something somewhere else in space or time. The statistics, however, suggest otherwise. And this is an account from the statistician who worked with the originators of the experiments in what is called remote viewing.
When I got involved, there was a classified program being done at what was then SRI, Stanford Research Institute, became SRI International, and I was on sabbatical at Stanford University, and I happened to meet the directors of that program, and they needed statistical help. Now, why statistical help? Well, because any single incident could be explained away as coincidence or a lucky guess, but when you combine evidence, when you do controlled experiments using statistics, you can't explain things away as lucky guesses because we control the probability that things should happen just by chance. During that time, there were two programs going on. There was a very highly classified program where we were using psychics to spy on our enemies, and there was the research program going on, which had a lower secret classification, and that was going on at SRI International, and that was where I was working as a statistician. So we would bring people in and do controlled experiments to see whether or not it would work statistically. It was actually a team of two of us, and the other guy was a well-known skeptic. So the two of us were asked to look at the scientific evidence, the statistical evidence, and what I did is I looked at the evidence not just from the government laboratories, but other laboratories around the world that were studying the same kind of thing. And what I found was amazing consistency across all of the different laboratories that were studying this. And that doesn't happen if it's just a fluke. And so what I found was overwhelming statistical evidence, the 10 to a billion or whatever, against chance for the data just by combining the data across the laboratories. The skeptic who was working with me agreed that there was overwhelming statistical evidence. He just didn't agree on what was causing it, but he had no alternative explanation.
When people do things like this, we tend to call them psychic. Statistically, anecdotally, we have a lot of evidence suggesting that people can do this. However, we're just beginning to think about what it is that a dog does. We assume when we give a dog something that someone owned or held or was close to, we assume that it's based on the dog's remarkable ability to smell that they're able to track the person. But what if it's not a scent that they're relying on, but something else? A couple weeks back, we looked briefly at the work of Rupert Sheldrake in this area. In the 1990s, he did some interesting experiments with dogs and other pets, using timers and videos to demonstrate that the pets knew when their humans were beginning the process of coming home, often while the humans were still in the office or wherever, and just thinking about it. Since Sheldrake's book, Dogs Who Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, came out, he's received many, many emails and letters describing such events in people's lives. One of my favorites of those involves the Queen of England, Elizabeth II, and her beloved dogs, the ones she trains at her Sandringham estate. The dog's caretakers say they always know when Her Majesty's vehicle arrives at the gate half a mile from the house because the dogs all start barking excitedly. And it's not always the same vehicle, and they're certainly not smelling the Queen. The BBC has documented some of Sheldrake's experiments, and I'll share a couple of the commentaries with you here.
Jan Fennell has 7 dogs. Since owning one as a child, Jan believes that animals are telepathic.
With these, they tend to know. If I'm going to walk them, they are wound up, excited, running around, making a noise, really generally letting me know they're ready.
Jan has agreed to take part in an experiment designed by Rupert to see whether her dogs are telepathic. She placed a video camera in her conservatory and locked the dogs inside for quite a few hours each day, while she remained in a different part of the house, out of sight. At random times throughout each day, Jan thought about taking the dogs for a walk. After 10 minutes of just thinking about it, she would actually take them. The video recording of their behaviour during these 10 minutes could then be observed.
You're going to get too big-headed, aren't you, eh? Because you're right again. One time I was upstairs putting some curtains up when I decided to take them for a walk. Had to check them beforehand, all fast asleep. As I came down the stairs, I could hear them. I didn't have to look. I could hear them making a racket.
In 5 out of the 7 tests, Jan felt that her dogs had definitely reacted to her thoughts.
What Jan's experiments show from the video recording is that the dogs don't get excited when she's not planning to take them for a walk. But when she is planning to take them for a walk, even though they can't see her, even though she's in another part of the house watching the television, for example, they seem to anticipate her intention.
That was Rupert Sheldrake on BBC back in the 90s, trying to describe what was going on and actually to get people to help contribute to. The end of that show was a request for people to participate in these experiments. He wanted as broad a base of information as he could have. So what's happening here? As we explored earlier on the Mind as Field show, Sheldrake is convinced that the mind is not limited to the brain, but in fact precedes the brain, precedes the development of the animal or the person, and guides that development. That the cells of the body take a particular form. Why do they curve, for example, at the end of the fingertip when they're identical cells with identical DNA? And they thought there must be some kind of electromagnetic force, a field that they called shape-creating, morphogenetic field that would help to shape the body. And in fact, there have been some photographs of something like an electromagnetic field around the emergent embryonic salamander or newt. So this field that is guiding the development of the body is not inside the body. It's not trapped inside the body. It's outside the body, and therefore can interact with other fields. And as we understand with quantum physics, fields are not limited to a particular place and time. In fact, fields can share in quantum entanglement with other fields. They obey the same laws as any other electromagnetic field and are present, well, they are present everywhere at once. So it really doesn't matter where or when someone is or has been for another person to be aware of that person. What matters is what Sheldrake calls resonance. There has to be a resonance between them, a connection of some kind that transcends time and space. Then the receiver needs to be aware of, needs to be conscious of information that is always available to us. As one of the experimenters on that BBC show put it, human beings have lost a skill that these animals still have. And that, as we explored last week, is what learning to enter other states of consciousness helps us do. Whenever we're in those states, the hypnagogic state as we fall asleep or wake up, or a deep state of prayer or reverie, we can begin to sense with our other senses or our inner senses the energy of the fields around us and the information that goes along with it. For my book review, I want to look at this book that we've been working on for this show, Rupert Sheldrake's Dogs Who Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. There's a link how to get hold of it on our website, noeticmoments.org. The book was first published in 1999, and a new edition came out in 2011, and is available in all the usual outlets. I've also drawn from a later book of his, which we spent some time on in an earlier show as well, The Sense of Being Stared At and Other Aspects of the Extended Mind. This was published in 2003 and is also readily available. In both of these books, Sheldrake describes in detail the experiments he did in a way that encourages other people to replicate them. Indeed, In the preface to The Sense of Being Stared At, he said, "This book differs from other accounts of unexplained human abilities in several ways," he says. "First, it is grounded in biology and animal behavior and treats telepathy and other unexplained abilities as aspects of our biological animal nature. Second, some books either bring together collections of stories or are rigorously experimental, excluding anything that has not been tested in the laboratory. I believe in combining both approaches. This book starts from the natural history of personal experiences, but wherever possible discusses experiments that can shed light on what is happening." He goes on, "Third, I show that scientific research on unexplained human powers can be done quite simply. And in Appendix A, I outline a variety of ways in which readers can take part in this research themselves. Fourth," he concludes, "although the phenomena I discuss are currently unexplained, I do not think they are inherently inexplicable. I argue throughout this book that the exploration of these abilities could lead to a new understanding of the nature of human and animal minds. Instead of thinking of minds as confined to brains, I suggest they involve extended fields of influence that stretch out far beyond brains and bodies." He also explains how it is that he came to understand that the mind must be a field rather than simply a set of chemical reactions going on in the cells of the brain. He says, "I first became convinced that living organisms were organized by fields when I was doing research at Cambridge University on the development of plants. How do plants grow from simple embryos inside seeds into foxgloves, sequoias, or bamboos?" He goes on, "The naive answer is to say that everything is genetically programmed. Somehow each developing plant or animal follows the instructions coded in its genes. The problem with this theory is that we actually know what genes do. They code for the sequence of building blocks called amino acids that make up protein molecules. Also, some genes are concerned with the control of protein synthesis. This is a very different matter from, quote, programming, unquote, morphogenesis, or instinctive behavior." He goes on, "Since the 1920s, many biologists who have studied the development of plants and animals have been convinced that in addition to the genes, there must be organizing fields within the developing organism. These fields contain, as it were, invisible plans or blueprints for the various organs and for the organism as a whole. These fields," he says, "not only help to explain normal development, but also regeneration. If you cut a willow tree or a flatworm into pieces, each piece can regenerate to form an entire new organism." He says, "First, morphogenetic fields work by imposing patterns or structures on otherwise random or indeterminate processes in the systems under the control. Second, they contain attractors which draw systems under their influence toward future goals. Third, they evolve along with the living organisms themselves. The morphic fields of all species have history and contain inherent memory given by the process I call morphic resonance. This resonance occurs between patterns of activity in self-organizing systems on the basis of similarity, irrespective of their distance apart." And then he says, "Morphogenetic fields are a part of a larger class of fields called morphic fields, all of which contain inherent memory given by morphic resonance. Other kinds of morphic fields include the behavioral fields that underlie the behavior and instincts of animals. As a kitten grows up, its instincts and behaviors are shaped by morphic resonance from countless cats in the past. In addition," he says, "the morphic fields of social groups or social fields coordinate the behavior of animal groups such as flocks of birds, termite colonies, schools of fish, and packs of wolves." Those are just a few off the top of the paragraph pieces one of the final chapters in his book, The Sense of Being Stared At. It's a marvelous summary and introduction to this concept of mind as field within the individual and shared by all the other members of a species that resonate with that being. Ah, that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world today and what you, the listeners, are curious about. One of the things that has come up is whether there's still interest in the military in these abilities. And as spying techniques, not so much. There are far more accurate means to determine what's going on in other places now than the remote viewers see. However, there is another aspect of this ability that is being studied in the military. I'll let this YouTube explain it.
Writer Annie Jacobson says the military is studying soldiers who seem to be able to sense danger.
An example would be a soldier out in the battlefield with a unit, and the one soldier says, "Let's not go down that street any further. I sense an IED." They'll send a robot out, and the robot will locate the buried IED.
It's called precognition, sensing what will happen before it does.
So the ability to sense what we cannot yet perceive is continuing to be of interest not only to the military, but to all those who are interested in what it is the mind really is and how it works. Well, that's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research that's being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is and what it really does. We are out of time for today, but remember you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, along with archived past shows, and you can click on the links. And you can send me your comments and questions, which I will do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, 90.7 in Florence, Oregon. I hope you have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.